Hi, I'm Matt Goulding, and I'm the co-founder of Roads and Kingdoms, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about something that I call Nomanomics. Now, by now, most of you have probably heard about the story of Noma. A young Danish kid goes off into the world to cook at some of the best restaurants on the planet, comes back to Copenhagen, and decides to start a restaurant. Now, the unique concept behind this restaurant was, rather than using products from around the world and relying on refined French cuisine, which was sort of the fine dining standard in Copenhagen at the time, he said, I only want to cook with Scandinavian products. It's going to be a fully Nordic cuisine that we embrace here. So rather than using olive oil, he used rapeseed oil. Rather than calling a purveyor for tomatoes, he would take his crew of chefs and wander into the woods and pick roots and shoots and leaves along the way. In 2010, Restaurant Magazine, who publishes the 50 best restaurants list, named Noma the best restaurant in the world, a title that it held for 3 consecutive years. Now, in that time, tourism in Denmark has risen precipitously. Speaking with René Redzepi when I reported the story for Roads and Kingdoms and for Time Magazine, he talked a lot about the change in tourism and the dynamics there in Copenhagen since opening Noma. He told me 5 years ago the thought of people traveling to Denmark to eat would have been an SNL joke. It's like going sunbathing in Baghdad, he told me. I spent some time with Jan Olsen, who's the CEO of Visit Denmark, the country's chief tourism board. And she said they've seen an 11% increase in tourism in Copenhagen and in the major cities. You don't come here for the climate, she told me. You come here for the people and for the food. And we're marketing very heavily on new Nordic cuisine. Now, depending on how granular you want to get with this, there's a lot of ways to frame this crazy phenomenon. One would be how one young man's decision to wander into the woods and pick roots and shoots has dramatically changed tourism for Denmark. Another way of looking at it would be how one restaurant can impact an entire country's economy. And perhaps the broadest way of looking at this is to look at how a new era of foodieism, essentially, is shaping the travel industry, which, after all, is why you guys are here gathered in Sweden today. Now, while Noma may be the most persuasive example of the power of a restaurant can have on the marketing and the experience of a country, it's important to remember that it wasn't just Noma that started this phenomenon. We could actually move all the way back to the early 80s to look at what happened in a region, in a country that I call home, in Catalonia, Spain. Now, in 1984, when Ferran Adrià, in his young 20s, took over a restaurant called El Bulli on the coast of Catalonia, about 2 hours north of Barcelona, the restaurant he took over was unknown at the time, a former miniature golf course and a hamburger and hot dog stand. Now, by the time Ferran and his legion of cooks served their last meal in July of 2011, El Bulli was known as the world's most influential restaurant, the greatest restaurant in the world, and truly the genesis of an entire transformation in Spanish cuisine. Spain, before El Bulli, was a second-class culinary citizen, living in the shadows of sort of the high dining cuisines of France and sort of the homey, rustic Italian charm. It never had those sort of global recognition of those cuisines. But Ferran and El Bulli changed that. And what spawned from that restaurant wasn't just an interest in one white-hot star, but an entire culture of cooking and chefs and tourism that followed in the footsteps of this man's massive success. But if you don't currently have a Michelin 3-star restaurant or one of Restaurant Magazine's top 50 restaurants in your town, don't despair. More humble restaurants from more humble origins can have a similar impact on local economies. I want to tell you one more story, the story of a self-proclaimed redneck from West Virginia by the name of Sean Brock. Sean came down to Charleston a few years back and decided to do something similar to what René Redzepi had done in Copenhagen, which is to say, to highlight Southern cuisine in its most pure, simple form. So rather than getting products from outside of the South or from purveyors around the world, he took every last ingredient from the region and showcased them on his menu. He opened the restaurant in 2011, Husk, and what followed was an explosion of Southern cuisine recognition and love around the country. And these days, you can't open a glossy magazine or a newspaper section without reading about how Charleston is the greatest destination in the country for eating, or how the South is the current, cuisine supreme. And the impact that Husk has had on Charleston could not be more clear. Readers from Condé Nast Traveler magazine have voted Charleston the best city in America the last 3 years. Cook It Raw, a massive international food event, is coming to Charleston this fall. Sort of a recognition again that this has become a global dining destination. And a lot of that, again, is due to the hard work that came from this one small restaurant. Now, of course, all these places, Catalonia, Copenhagen, Charleston, have plenty to offer on their own, and they've long been reasonably popular tourist destinations. But sometimes it takes a catalyst for the full scope of virtues to be appreciated in towns like this. And I think what we've seen in recent years is a number of factors conspiring to make the impact of individual restaurants larger than it's ever been. Let's take a look at a couple of these force multipliers. First up, I think probably the most obvious one is social media. This information is blasted out via Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, whatever means, and shared in an incredibly easy, incredibly digestible way. So the reputation of a restaurant like Noma grows by leaps and bounds the longer it gets out there, such to the point where your mom, who doesn't know anything about restaurants, probably knows that there's this great restaurant in Copenhagen that everybody talks about. Foodieism in general, I think, is probably perhaps the strongest force multiplier. We've reached the kind of the Bourdain era, where traveling for the sake of eating has become a totally reasonable and viable way for us to move about the planet. This is an era where farmers are rock stars and chefs are golden gods in our eyes. People follow chef trades and restaurant openings the way they used to follow baseball stats and stock exchange maneuvers. So it's a truly remarkable phenomenon that I don't think could be overestimated when we talk about the impact the individual restaurants are having on tourism around the world. And then perhaps the most controversial of these sort of force multipliers would be these restaurant lists, in particular the best restaurant list that I've been talking about from Restaurant Magazine. Now, a lot can be said about their function, about whether they can be trusted, whether they're legitimate. Of course, food is totally a subjective topic. But the point is that someone out there had the audacity to create a list that is voted on by chefs and food writers around the world that actually listed from 1 to 50 the greatest restaurants in the world, banking on the fact that this sort of sense of ego and self-importance in the food world, which is very strong, would create enough interest around this list that it became essentially a de facto official listing of restaurants. So now that you have a 1 that's in Copenhagen, you have a 2 that's in Sao Paulo, and you have a 3, people actually talk about these things in very, very concrete terms and plan trips around them. So these things are all working together to create this sort of exaggerated impact that normally wouldn't have existed 20 or 30 years ago, where a great restaurant was a great restaurant. If you happened to be in the town, you would go to see it, you go to visit it, you go to eat there. But we've now entered an era where we plan entire trips around the world solely out of hope to eating at a single place. But, what people would normally say is, how can a restaurant like Noma, that has 20,000 seats, truly have an impact on not just the economy of Copenhagen, but on the economy of Denmark? And it's true, 20,000 tourists is a drop in the tourism bucket when we look at just that number. But I think what people aren't fully recognizing when we talk about these phenomenon is that there's an incredible trickle-down effect with the way foodie culture has developed and the way restaurant culture has been elevated in recent years. So I want to talk a little bit about the degrees of impact that we're seeing around these restaurants. So for me, I think when I'm reporting the story for Roads and Kingdoms and traveling up and down Denmark, meeting the people who have sort of been bathing in the reflected glory of Noma, if you will, I've noticed that there's been 4 or 5 degrees of impact, and you can kind of follow it from the top of the chain all the way down. So beyond the restaurant itself, of course, there's the impact on the diners, on the 20,000 lucky people who will wake up early in the morning, go onto their computer, click like crazy, try to make a reservation at this incredibly impossible to get into restaurant, and hopefully score the golden ticket. They will tell other people about it, and it raises consciousness. People go on, look at Copenhagen, read about it. So the individual diner is being greatly impacted by the sort of star power of these restaurants. And what happens as a result of that then is another degree of impact, which is on the local restaurateurs, other chefs, other restaurant owners who have suddenly find the confidence and the creative sort of spirit to go after cuisine in a way they haven't before. So Copenhagen, I think, is one of the greatest examples we can think of, because speaking with Red Zeppi, speaking with other chefs around the city, what everybody was saying was that the problem with the restaurant scene in Copenhagen and in Denmark was there was no sense of local cuisine. There was no pride. People were eating French food and being happy eating basically the same food that people were eating in Paris. And what Red Zeppi did was show them that you can actually cook food that is Nordic, that has an identity, that has a sort of a sense of self. And so what we saw in the wake of Noma, and what we're still seeing today, is guys like Christian Pugliese, who runs a restaurant not far from Noma that they call Noma Light, Rely, where it's cheaper, the menu is a little bit less elaborate, the setting is a little less formal, but the food is no less exciting. So people who can't get into Noma all of a sudden are trying to get into Rely. Amas, which is a restaurant opened up by the executive chef of Noma for the past 5 years, a guy named Matt Orlando, a guy from San Diego, who believes so deeply in this new Nordic cuisine that he helped create that he decided to branch off and start his own restaurant. And now you go online and you try to make a reservation at Amas, and it's impossible. That energy is there, and there's 10 or 15 other restaurants specifically within Copenhagen. And if you look look further out into the rest of the country, you're seeing these types of openings and this type of culture of restaurants being opened that was never there before. So those are very, very obvious examples of people who are being impacted by this. But on a less obvious note, you're seeing people on the supply chain, people that we met while traveling around Denmark. We were all the way up in the north on an island called Mors, and we went on an oyster boat with a fisherman named Benny Anderson. And speaking with Benny, he actually was accustomed to sending off most of his catch, which were blue mussels and some of the best oysters in the world, off to Spain, because it was the Spaniards who truly appreciated just how good his shellfish was. People in Denmark, despite the fact that they have this incredible bounty at their fingertips, were more happy eating pork than they were eating shellfish. And that has started to change now. Now you're seeing restaurants like Noma, Rely, Amas using these raw ingredients that guys like Benny are out catching and cultivating in their restaurants. Soren Vuf, who's an eccentric farmer from an hour north of Copenhagen, who ran a small farm for many years and became a purveyor for Noma in its early years, was sort of elevated to rock star status when René Redzepi and his crew started using his heirloom carrots, his white asparagus, some of the funky potato and root vegetable experiments that he was playing with in his farm. We went out and visited Soren, and we were there right after a camera crew from CNN had been through there. An Italian journalist and their camera crew had been there before. This is a farmer in rural Denmark we're talking about. Clearly he is feeling the impact of the star power of a restaurant like Noma. Then you can look at kind of the outliers, people who don't even have a direct connection to the restaurant industry, but who nonetheless are benefiting off of these types of changes. So we met a number of bloggers who were so empowered and sort of so encouraged by the success of Noma that they've tossed off their jobs as IT guys and working in sort of regular industry and have started writing about food in Denmark, have actually embraced this full culinary movement and found enough interest and enough readership to actually sustain themselves. Now, at the bottom of all of this is the tourism boards themselves, catching all of this incredible sort of influx of interest with open arms. It's undeniable. Again, talking with Jan Olsen from Visit Denmark, she was basically telling me that Noma is their number one resource when it comes to marketing Copenhagen, right up there with some of the bigger attractions in the city itself. And it shows. They have the Danish government has invested $12 million in food, which is an acronym for a Danish sort of a culinary development center that banks on this idea that restaurants can essentially impact the economy of this region. So, this year, 2013, the best restaurants list came out from Restaurant Magazine, and for the first time in 4 years, Noma was knocked off of its perch. It was replaced by a new number one right back in my adopted home region of Catalonia, El Sierra de Can Roca, another kind of rural Catalan restaurant that will once again sort of capture the culinary heat that El Bulli used to hold there on the Catalan coast. So the food cognoscenti has moved on. All the crazy sort of immediate international attention has moved their focus back to Spain or other places around the world. But the impact has already been felt. The pieces have been built. The energy is there. Speaking with Redzepi and Puglisi and Matt Orlando, they all felt very, very confident that despite the fact that the crown is no longer in the Kingdom of Denmark, so to speak, that the benefit is already there, and that's not going to leave anytime soon. One of the last things that Redzepi told me is, this is just the beginning. And I think that's a lesson that everybody out there working in the food and the tourism industry should take to heart. So a personal anecdote. The reason why I can't be with you guys today is because I'm en route to Japan. And the reason I'm going to Japan is because of intense fascination with a single restaurant, a 6-seat sushi bar in Tokyo called Sawada, where the young chef there is doing crazy, funky things with fish, aging tuna, fermenting funky products, just things that food geeks like me will travel around the world to experience. But the readers of our magazine connect food with travel. They don't want to just go to one restaurant. If they're going to go all the way to Japan, they're going to need to know how to get from north to south, how to eat their way around the country, all the vital, important tidbits that it takes to actually make a real trip happen. And that's what happens. An interest in one restaurant turns into a 6-week trip for me, which turns into a rush of information for the readers out there, and thus the cycle begins again. That's what Nomanomics is.